Okay, can everybody hear me all right on uh, the stream? I hope so. Just let me know in the chat if you can hear me okay. I think there'll be a slight delay. Um, but if you can let me know on the chat, that'd be good. Okay. Yes, people can hear me. Fantastic. Wonderful. So hello everybody. Welcome to the Full Moon in Scorpio Reflections with Q&A. And I will just quickly flicks to the chart. There we go. And now you can hear me. There we go. That should work now. I just muted myself there. Okay. Yeah, the sound went out, that's right, but it should be back now. So just move that. Okay, awesome. So new moon or full moon in Scorpio. There's been quite a lot of things that have actually been taking place in the collective at the moment, and we'll kind of get to that. I'm just going to start off with something that seems to be pretty apparent in the astrology, and that is this whole entire collection of symbols that are situated over here, with Uranus, Venus, Mercury, and the Sun. So, and they're all in the sign of Taurus, right? Now, maybe what I'd like to do to kind of initiate us into understanding the Taurus energy, or the archetype of Taurus, is that it's part of a fixed cross. So it's part of the connection between Aquarius, which is sitting over here. So it's the fixed signs. So Taurus is part of Aquarius. It's part of the sign Leo, and it's also part of the sign Scorpio. Okay, so when you're looking at Taurus, you've always got to bear in mind that Scorpio is interacting with Taurus a lot. Aquarius is influencing it a lot, and so is Leo. Right? When we isolate Taurus, what we're doing in the context of these fixed signs is we're looking at the fundamental principle, or the archetype in this reality, that at its core is about sustainability. Okay, and so survival, sustainability, these are all aspects that are what is associated with the Taurus archetype. Okay, and what's really crucial to really understand about this concept of, or this archetypal energy of sustainability and survival, is that we will be spending the next sort of 7 years with the Uranus energy moving through this sign, radically shifting and changing and altering and breaking down crystallized patterns of structure. Okay, and the reason why it's always structure is because, again, something that has been formed in the past is the structure of whatever we've manifested, or it's been in existence. But then when Uranus comes along, it changes that and says, okay, we've got to look at it differently, we've got to observe it differently. Let's see where something that is rooted in the past is no longer supporting, and so we need a kind of paradigm shift. So the paradigm shift for this full moon in Scorpio, in my opinion, not only has to do with the Taurus archetype, but it also has to do in terms of the shift, like the movement of energy away from this collective experience of Uranus in Aries and Pluto in Pluto in Capricorn, and the square that's taking place, right? So since 2012, 2000, like late 2011, Uranus has been playing around over here in Aries, and it's been making a connection to Pluto and Capricorn for the whole of these, since, like I said, 2012. And, since last year, May, it ingressed into Taurus, and we had a little bit of time where Uranus was in Taurus, and then it kind of moved backwards into Aries, and we had to deal with a lot of, Uranus and Aries stuff. But from my sort of point of view, tracking the cycles, this full moon speaks to the real turn of attention to this Taurus archetype completely. And so at the core of these archetypes, we will now be focusing on and paying attention to what is sustainable and what is the archetype of survival at the core of it. So the core of it, okay? So everything has layers to it. And so when we talk about the core, we talk about everything that exists at a nuclear level, the fundamental manifestation of something. And so we'll see this shift begin to become even more prominent in our lives going forward, because I feel that this full moon really initiated us into this energy. Okay, it initiated us full blown into this energy. And the way that I back this up is, if you have a look, Venus is making a connection to Uranus. So Venus moves across Uranus during the full moons, like the moon approaching its full moon status. And then, of course, during the actual full moon itself, it's crossing it and then moving over it. So let's just talk about this cycle for a second, okay? When you're talking about an outer planet energy, and you take an inner planet energy like Venus, and they make contact together, we're going to have deep psychological material or stuff that exists beneath the conscious level become conscious. Okay, so that's pretty self-evident and pretty straightforward. But what I'm really trying to speak here is that, if you had to really understand what I mean by this, I'm talking about, imagine if you had to, not imagine, let's take a tree, okay? And if you had to cut the tree in half, you would see that there would be layers, right? And each layer represents a kind of space and time, and almost like an emotional crystallizing of that space at that time. So when you're looking at an outer planet in an astrology chart, and you're trying to sense the nature of its vibration, you've got to be thinking about the kind of contextual layers that have preceded this moment, and what is buried in there, and what subtle nuances and what types of emotional imprinting and memory is part of that. So when a personal planet like Venus touches an outer planet, and you can see that with Saturn and Pluto as an example, and again, another great way to visually see that is through how structures and forms and paradigms of thinking and the way that we've contextualized things in our lives are very real to us at the moment. And we're really, really finding a lot of confrontation, like an intense amount of confrontation around the way that we shape things in our lives. But I won't follow that strand more, because I'm talking about Uranus and Venus here at the moment. So here's this inner planet of Venus. It's something that we can relate to on a day-to-day basis, right? So what are your needs? What do you do every single day that you define as essential for your life, right? So every one of us has a specific value system that is rooted in something that we consider to be essential for us, that we see that is important for our daily activity. You can already begin to see that Uranus holds a deeper subconscious, subtle fabric of emotional imprinting, memory, and Venus speaks to something that we can relate to on a day-to-day basis, that we have embedded within ourselves, a way of, how we sustain ourselves, a certain practice that you do. If you're into tarot, you might you might say, every single day you consult the tarot and you say, how is this day going to be? Or if you're somebody that's into nutrition and health, you might say to, okay, right, I'm going to have my celery juice and I'm going to eat my food that's, based on raw diet, etc. And you have somebody else that just loves drinking tea and speaking on the internet and, like having a Facebook chat with a bunch of people every single day. And that's what they do. And that's kind of what is, in a sense, a conscious attachment to a value that over time is almost, in a sense, a habit. So when Venus, which was this more conscious explanation, and Uranus make a contact, what we will be having, and this is really at the core of what this full moon represents to me, is when they make the contact like this, what is going to happen is we're going to have energy of Uranus, in a sense, help us become sensitive to pre-existing value structures that are embedded within our psychological makeup and our vision and what we perceive and think is, valuable to us or resourceful to us or essential to us. And we will have an experience that will bring stuff to the surface. And you're like, oh, okay, do I like this, as an example? So one of the things that was, super evident and very clear, and I haven't investigated it much apart from just a little bit of here and there taking in. So my sort of perception on it is not that sharp. However, I can say that to me, it was not a coincidence. So in the States at the moment, that there was legislation that was passed that said that abortion was now something that was essentially legal, which if you're any person that is, aware of the current state of the world at the moment, you will be very, very aware of the fact that this is a massively sensitive issue. It's a massively sensitive thing. And the threads of the emotional context of this event and this experience is very, 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 very deeply embedded within the collective psyche. Okay, so here you have Venus approaching and then hitting the Uranian component, and on this full moon experience, we're now visually aware of this very, very, very intense moon in Scorpio thing where it's life and death. And we're playing with the ideas of who defines this and who gets the right to do this and who's, who's in charge and what is sovereignty. So, just in a very sort of slow way, you can see this whole entire chart start to illuminate, because it touches not only a very core, essential value structure within our psyche, it also brings to the surface and helps you confront what you consider to be the right thing or the wrong thing. And one of the best ways that you can actually get in touch with this this energy, even though of course the new moon was actually yesterday, or the full moon was yesterday, the reverberating energy is still very present with us. All you need to do is just get into a discussion or a conversation with somebody that has different views to you on this, and you will very, very quickly get ahead of how confrontational and how sensitive this specific thing is about. And to me, that is really, one of the major things that this full moon in Scorpio really held and represented. It was not that specific situation or that, but the fact that it brought to the surface, one, the ability for you to get in contact in a very intimate way, Scorpio intimacy, vulnerable, transparency, those types of feelings, getting in contact with that and feeling where you stand on something like this and where are your views and how do you feel about that and what shapes that. And so let me go on to looking at the context of Jupiter in Sagittarius, because something like this, as an example, has a lot of subtle imprinting around it regarding religious views and perspectives and certain ideologies and certain views that may or may not actually be, in a sense, supportive. So here we have something really, 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 really interesting show up for us. And Jupiter being retrograde points to and suggests to how this internal process how this internal process is questioning where your values lie and where do you sit on this multifaceted like block of collective imprinting. Okay, where do you where do you stand, and how are you shaped? That's probably the most deep, like the not the deepest, but a very sharp arrow that points at you when you look at yourself and you observe your own relationship to it. And to be quite honest, a lot of people might not actually have taken any sort of interest in the experience because it's not on your doorstep and it's not really happening to you. And so therefore, what do you mean, Simon, that it can be confrontational or intimate in that sense? And sure, yeah, it's not on your doorstep. So what's the interest? And that doesn't mean that this energy is not very real and relevant. It just means that that specific situation is not at your most forefront. But there are other things that are around you that are, in a sense, pressing the question of what shapes your vision about life and how does that then become the overall structure. And so here's the Saturn conjunct the South Node in Capricorn and Pluto context. And a lot of these energies, in my view, a lot of these energies represent new direction. Okay, new direction. And it's not progressive. I'm not saying it's progressive energy, like, oh, we're progressing into something new that's different. I'm saying it is an energy of new direction. And so simply meaning that in terms of our ability to recognize what we have been doing with Uranus square Pluto over the last 7 years, in terms of things being shaken up collectively through our social structures changing and the assimilation of technology into our lives at such a rapid rate, and what does that mean for us, and how do we sort of begin to contend with the fact that the new form of media in the world now is something that is the internet, and not something that people go and watch TV, as an example. This would be another kind of way of seeing this this energy arrive for us, in the sense that if you looked back at life, say for instance 10 years ago, we would still be on some level sort of watching the television series, having information given to us. And now, post Uranus and Uranus in Aries, Pluto in Capricorn square, right? In this archetype, we're now coming to the internet and we're saying, well, this is my mode of digestion, and I actually, through my history, can see what things I actually like and what I listen to and what my field of vision is about. And this is very individual and highly selective, and there's a freedom in it, and that's amazing. And then also now you get to see that as you've kind of begun to shape yourself along the idea of, oh, what's this and who am I? Uranus now enters Taurus, and it says, okay, so what do you value? Where do you, what current do you want to swim on? Because there's an infinite amount of currents at the moment. I mean, all you need to do in terms of just going to go and practice the exercise of what I'm sharing with you today is that you can go onto the internet and type in just 10 random things that you just type in 10 random things, like Barbie dolls as an example, or playing with Play-Doh, or this is unfortunate in my life, kids under the age of 6, things like, anything you can imagine, just do 10 of them, and you will see that there's a whole entire universe of people that are just doing that, and that's what they do, and this is just the nature of our reality at this point in time. And so there's so much diversity and there's so much openness within the context of what is available, because everybody is, in a sense, kind of very free to express their creative endeavor, and probably mostly very limited to the Western world at the moment in time. This is what I'm really addressing here. Most of us that are watching this are in this kind of sphere or spectrum. And so you can go in and analyze the nature of reality for other cultures and other places, and this would be still relevant. It would just be the context would be different. So just to kind of clarify that for people. So here we have this whole entire diversity, but now it says, okay, well, what part of this do you like? What part of it do you value? Why do you do that? That's another question. Why? And going back to when I was talking about Scorpio being a fixed sign and it opposes Taurus, which is where the full moon was, and we have Leo also as fixed sign and Aquarius as the fixed sign. The Scorpio component says, okay, so, why do you osmose with that? Why do you merge with that process? What's the attachment? So why are you watching this video that I'm doing over here? What is the interest? Why do you value it? So these are the kind of underlying sort of archetypal expressions that can begin to surface into our conscious awareness that will reshape the vision that we have about ourselves and about the world that we live in. And, and I'm speaking very sort of personally over here. I'm not talking about looking at the overall climate of reality for us as a universal one entity. So things like climate change, as an example, is a very profound sort of movement that's going along at the moment, because people are going, okay, well, just as an example, one of the slogans would be that why go to school, the kids, if we're not going to be here in the future, as an example. And that's a very Taurus thing. It's like, oh my God, if we don't save the planet, we're not going to be here. That's Taurus. It's fear in that sense, which is another beautiful thing to actually get into when it comes to the nature of Taurus as an archetype. At its very root, it's fundamentally saying the reason why we're surviving is because if you don't understand your essential needs and you can't facilitate the resources around you, the probability of your survival is going to be very thin. And so therefore you need to start getting in touch with what those needs are. And that's a very complex thing to understand for a human being, at least. Especially when we've developed an ego structure that is a little bit more advanced than sort of primal, I need to just eat and sleep, because those are very much Taurus archetypes, self-activation and, sort of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and talking about the context of self-realization and getting to the top over there is something that is not necessarily, in my view, something that all of us have the capacity to have, because of very, very large things that can influence our life. Like, for instance, if you're in a situation and, life hands you one of those really, really tough situations and that's not part of it. Self-actualization in a sense is very limited to, within the Western world, at least at this point in time. And I'm being very careful of what I'm talking about here. To what's the word I'm looking for? Like, the availability to how much resources you have available to yourself, as an example, right? So lots of people would sit and they'd be like, oh, I dream to be an astrologer, as an example. And then they go online and they go, okay, let's go and see if I can study astrology. And then it's just this whole entire world of overwhelmingness and the amount of investment that you have to do. And some people don't have those things. And so therefore it becomes very much a survival kind of context. And this is something that I think Uranus is going to sort of try to push the envelope on and begin to help us see that there are aspects of our reality that can't actually facilitate that structural nature in our reality anymore. And so therefore we need to find alternative ways to actually begin sharing and including and interacting with each other in ways that is very supportive in that sense. And so even as I share this with you today, as I talk about this right now, I'm hypersensitive to how my own personal Jupiter or Sagittarius energy and how it has been shaped, and what experiences I've had in my life and certain privileges that I've gotten, things that have made my life a lot more easier than, say, for instance, another person. Those things are very prominent and can be, easily seen within my own personal vision and subjective perception of reality. This is all what I feel and sense this full moon is going to initiate, and is initiating, to be honest, in different ways, in different parts of your life. Something will come up that will challenge the nature of the value system that you have. And so what will occur is that there will be a interaction between what is going to be beneficial and supportive to you, and how is that going to be something that you either give attention to and you allow movement, like you give attention to and you act in a way that holds the value of those of that behavior. So one thing that I have noticed so far within the collective at the moment is that, as I was going on about so much diversity, is that what do you value and what tribe do you wish to belong to? That North Node in Cancer, and I also put it on the chart over here. There you can see the Mars just entering Cancer as well. and that's another thing to back this up, is the planetary, or the ruler, or the energy that would be influencing the North Node is now also going to begin to influence Mars. So it's not a coincidence that Mars enters Cancer, which is the evolutionary driving force at a conscious level. Mars entering Cancer at the exact same time that the moon opposes Taurus, right? A moon in Scorpio. So it already initiates this shock into change, right? Radical shift. And so we're not dealing with Uranus and Aries stuff anymore. We're dealing now with Uranus and Venus and Taurus stuff, Mercury and Taurus, Sun right at the end degrees of Taurus. At the same time that Venus is crossing Uranus, it's like illumination into this stuff, illumination into the values. And the funny thing about this whole entire experience is that, we as human beings are so incredibly diverse and so incredibly in terms of our individual ego structures. But at the core of it, we're all kind of unified by one form, which is the fact that we're all human. We have these hands and these arms and a head as an example, and sort of we interact with each other in a way that seems to be over the whole entire world very similar, right? We need to eat. We breathe, as an example. There's a lot that keeps us in common, and yet the kind of extension of our individual personalities to be able to observe ourselves as a differentiated self leads us to this diversity. And you can actually see that with the planetary node of Uranus, ironically, is actually in Sagittarius and Gemini. So we are, as a culture, as a collective culture, experiencing diversity and learning how to sort of live in an ecosystem in which we can find a sense of social habitability with each other while such diversity exists. And I think that with Pluto and Capricorn, and Saturn in Capricorn, and the South Node in Capricorn, a lot of that energy, going back to the kind of the tree analogy where I'm talking about the different subtle layers of emotional imprinting, we have been here for a very long time, and the social fabric of our reality is deeply influenced by our history. And you just need to look at our history to observe that there's been some really, really intense stuff happen to us. And so we carry with us a tremendous amount of memories that are rooted in a kind of, let me just fix the screen over there. Okay, so we've rooted in this separation, this complex of separation and segregation, and the you just need to look at South Africa as an example during from 1960s, apartheid, and then going further back in terms of America. And it's you can see that there is quite a lot of sort of uncomfortable wounding that has been accompanying our process of individuation and how we define ourselves as different. And so this Taurus energy, to me, is going to begin to, in my opinion, initiate the framework for how we actually, number one, find a way to coexist with each other under the new circumstances of technology coming into our lives and what that means for us, and social media as an example, and how we communicate in such rapid ways. And the ability for somebody like myself, as an example, to sit here and share my own views on the internet, and to that have a certain impact on certain people, and to be so rapid. And it's not something that I can kind of think about it in terms of like 20 years ago, like sending a fax of a whole entire new moon reports or a full moon report. Imagine if everybody just, there was a way to collect everybody's numbers, telephone numbers, and then you'd get a little fax come through, and that would be the way that we would sort of communicate in the past. But now we're dealing with it being so instant. And so that also has ramifications for the way that we as human beings structure ourselves. And we don't know what that's about because we've never been here before. And so this whole entire Uranus thing again brings to us a complete new series of what is essential. And one of the things that I think is actually pretty hilarious, though, and it just has such truth to it, is for most of us that live in the West, the ability to have technology freely available to us is so, for the most of us, it's so easy. Okay, it's you don't need to go far to be able to have access to it. Even if it's at a very low resolution experience, it's still there. You know, the infrastructure is slowly but surely starting to materialize. And one of the dark sides, of course, of this is the 5G technology, which is another Uranus and Taurus thing that's going to be interesting to observe, and scary at the same time. But coming back to this thing again about interacting with technology, is that, you know, Maslow's hierarchy of needs is actually evolved, and the bottom line is no longer food and shelter anymore. It's actually Wi-Fi connection, and it's just interesting to observe that in and of itself is such a like a truthful thing. You know, how many of us find ourselves, and again, you have to actively like clear out your attraction to technology. And you know, for some of us, we with Neptune in Sagittarius, you know, we like to live off grid, and it's not part of our lives, and that's also true. But for a lot of people that sort of are in the collective field in a consensus way, that are not listening to this conversation, technology is something that pretty much is where your whole entire business exists, or your identity exists. And that in and of itself is another whole entire random thing as well. Like, people's identities now exist in an ether. And that, how do we interact with that? How have our brains being able to develop the psychological neurological pathways that support abstract realities, as an example. And so that is a whole entire thing. And the values that are being influenced and shaped according to how social structures are now being established on technology, as an example, and that whole entire thing. So we're going to kind of figure this out. And that, to me, I think, is what this whole entire full moon is about. It's the initiation into the actual process. And so it's not about dealing with Uranus and Aries cycles anymore. It's not about, you know, that's still reverberating in the background in terms of us being directed that way. But I feel like the direction part has already taken place, and we're sort of, you know, fairly awake to the realization that technology in and of itself is here, and the development of you know, new ways of media existing is here. And so what do we do with it, and how do we interact with it as human beings, and how does that reshape the way that we as social creatures interact with it? Because primarily we are still part of a sort of evolutionary progression that hasn't interfaced with us for a very long time. And so obviously that has a lot of implications as well. And I think that that's what Uranus and Taurus will also begin to reveal to us, is how do we interface with an entirely new set of structures and rules, and what does that mean for us, and where does that trigger us, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of things there that I think is really big with this Taurus archetype. And of course, wherever that lands personally in your astrology chart will have significance as well. So all of this stuff for me lands in my fourth house, you know, in the house of home and the roots. And, you know, I've been receiving quite a lot of information from the Uranus field about healing, you know, subconsciously healing pre-existing belief patterns and ideologies and stuff like that. And I've noticed with inside of myself things that have been shifting in accordance with the values. So for you personally, of course, wherever this lands in your chart, if it's in your first house or if it's in your fifth house, or, you know, that's something that you would also want to look at in that sense. So to let me just kind of summarize over here, it's very evident that with, let me just move the cursor over there, with Mars moving into Cancer, it's initiating the North Node in Cancer. You know, it's giving emphasis to this. At some point, Mars, which is sitting there, will actually cross the North Node. And of course, that will, you know, highlight to us that energy in a very big way. And the new moon, the full moon in Scorpio, opposing this, right? Look at that opposition over there. Completely, it's always going to be an opposition. But that opposition over there is very significant in the sense that it's at the latter degrees of the cycle, you know. And so that gives significance to the fact that this is initiation process. And then you've also got Venus, which is, again, a planet that is associated with the Taurus archetype, you know, the essential needs. How do we, like as an example, how do we interact with each other now with such diversity, with such labeling of different ways of thinking? That's one way. Another way is, how many of us are realizing the liberation that's taking place based on, sort of almost peeling away pre-existing ideologies and views that you may have of something, and how is that bringing you to a place of, wow, this is a new me in that way. And that might not even be that intense, but on some level there are aspects of yourself, I'm sure, that are shifting for you and changing for you, and they're kind of changing and shifting because you're noticing that what you actually value is now a lot more important than, say, for instance, what you may have felt or conditioned, being a very operative word here, conditioned to believe was essential for your life, in that sense, so that's a big thing, I think. Okay. So Mars there in Scorpio, pardon me, not in Scorpio, Cancer, initiation into that. And then, as I said, you've got this Venus-Uranus conjunction, very clear. It's very much the initiation, the sudden rapid changes into breaking molds and saying, I don't want this anymore. I don't value this anymore. Or, you know what, I didn't actually know that that's how emotionally I was attached to this view or this belief system in that sense. So another thing that I want to just illustrate to you guys quickly, and this is actually a great segue into something that I'm really excited to actually do, and I'm doing it very slowly, Taurus, because I value creating something that is timeless, but in a sense deeply, deeply illuminating. And that's this natural zodiac series that I've been wanting to do. I have on and off for the last like 4 years. I've been trying to do it, and for some random reason, every time I've tried to do the natural zodiac and to teach the value of what's so beautiful about the natural zodiac, which is why I started out by saying that, Taurus is inherently part of the fixed square with Leo and Scorpio and Aquarius, is because the natural zodiac, which is Aries, Taurus, Gemini, going in this 12 sequence, that's the natural zodiac. When I say that, there's a profound level of knowledge in there that's not something that, it's just encoded within the bedrock of the fabric of reality. And so you can perceive them as archetypes that make up in different ways what this place is about. So when you see the Taurus archetype connected over here and you see the Cancer archetype, there's always going to be, in my sort of vision, it's not always the case, so just contradicting myself a little bit there, not always the case, but at least 80% of the time, you're going to see somebody where a lot of Taurus energy and a lot of Cancer energy is prevalent. And so ninth house stuff or Sagittarius stuff seems to also linger a little bit. And one of the conclusions I came to / observations was that, well, when you look at the Taurus archetype and you look at its relationship to the Cancer archetype, Cancer and Taurus work like this. Firstly, they're 60 degrees apart from each other, so it's called a sextile, and sextile energy is supportive energy. And you'll notice that Taurus is an energy that's very feminine, and Cancer is an archetype that's also feminine. So we're dealing with yin energy. We're dealing with energy that's coming back to the center. Okay? So when the energy is coming back to the center, it's deeply receptive, and it's pulling something in. Okay. And so when you have Cancer as an archetype that's water and Taurus that's an archetype of earth, you can see land and water are very clear, right? You can just look outside in nature and you can see that mud and dirt and land and water interact with each other. You don't see sort of like, unless you're a fantasy artist, land just hovering in midair. It doesn't exist in that sense. So you always see water and land, for majority of the space on Earth, very much connected together. And so that's how you can see the connection between Taurus and Cancer, or water signs and earth signs. So here you have this energy where Taurus represents to us the fundamental essential needs for survival. So structure, right? Something that really holds us at a very deep level safe. And then the Cancer archetype says, okay, so how do we nurture that safety? So one of the ways that you can see that is that in our homes, we find that the most primary psychological need for sleep, as an example, is held within a home-like experience. Or another way to see it is the womb. The womb is closed off, and again, just randomly showing you how these archetypes are not just like spontaneously bursting into existence, and then all of a sudden this reality of the womb comes into play. It's not a joke in that sense. It's very, very literal, because it's the language of the stars, and that is what we are. We're interconnected with that in the most profound way. And so why would we not be, in a sense, manifesting into reality the very nature of these archetypes? And so we're dealing with what is going to survive, and who has what belief systems, Sagittarius, are like placed onto the values that we hold for surviving and not surviving. Okay, as an example. And then we're dealing with the womb here, right? Here again with the Cancer archetype, Mars entering Cancer. We're dealing with this now. It's all about the womb. And we're dealing with protection. We're dealing with what surrounds us to protect our most primal needs in that sense, yeah? And so these two archetypes are consistently always interfacing with each other. And again, you have a home, and you have the wall, and it's your womb inside, and inside your womb, inside your home, you are then able to sleep in that sense. And so vast majority of people will choose to sleep indoors than sleep outside, okay, in the sense of when there is a storm, okay, simply because the walls offer protection. It's a natural human instinct to do that. We want that shelter, as it were. And so again, we're dealing with fundamental archetypes of shelter and protection against threats. And then those threats then become an essential, they are driven from this need, this primordial need for survival. So Taurus and Cancer. The Sagittarius component at the top there doesn't actually get seen. So it's called an inconjunct, all right? And so the inconjunct between Sagittarius and Cancer and Sagittarius and Taurus, what happens here is that our belief systems are structured and formed around what we value and how that keeps us safe. And so identity, okay, into this sense. So that's the same thing. So somebody writes in the post over here, I moved out of my house into an RV. The RV is still the home, because you wouldn't be, there is no place for you to cook your food randomly and nowhere. You would need kind of like an RV as a home. It's just a different form of it. And that's actually a beautiful way to see this. You moved out of your house, so you redefined it completely. And then you defined your shelter, like you said, in a different way. And still, you still exist in there. And so that's the point. It's still that we have something that we protect. And so another beautiful way to actually see the choice for moving out, observe the values and observe what choices you made to rediscover a completely new way of living. That would be another way to see how the astrology is coming through here, you know. So coming back to the Sagittarius archetype, within the context of our views and our beliefs, there is an identity. And that identity is holding us in safety and security. And it's because of what? It's because of vulnerability. You know, so you don't, like, it's very, 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 very difficult to stand alone in your view completely and feel like, yeah, I can do this. Because I just don't believe it. I believe that you can muster up courage, Cancer in, you know, connecting to Aries, and you can be very sort of brave about the process, but in a sense, the context of vulnerability is still very much at the root of it. And so when you interact with another person's views or beliefs coming at you about something, there is going to be a subtle sense of, oh, does this person value the same thing I do? Yes. Okay, I feel safe. I can engage with them. They're part of my tribe. No. Okay. Well, there's no sort of like, there's a sense of identity differentiation, firstly. And secondly, it's, okay, so you don't value the same as me. I immediately then can objectify my own belief and go, yours is different to mine, right? And so therefore we have, in a sense, a separation. And it's not a negative separation, it's just different views. And we can define the different views as because of the nature of identity and structure. And at the root of it, it becomes a necessity for a point of view. We need to orientate ourselves. This is the idea of this inconjunct. It's belief or vision or ideology or perspective is what helps us center ourselves within the context of something that is inherently just overwhelming, and you need it psychologically. So we're dealing with this right now with the Sagittarius, Jupiter and Sagittarius in retrograde form, as it connects to, because Jupiter is exactly in conjunct Mercury at 24 degrees, and the Sun would have been in conjunct Jupiter over the last 4 days, preceding this new moon, this full moon. So again, we're dealing with the context of how this reconfiguration of values has brought up the experience of what is your vision and where do you stand and how do you stand. So again, you can take, for instance, you are a liberal, and then you stand on the other side. You're right or left, which are you? And in a sense, that is a division in of itself, because it's saying, well, these are my views or these are my views, and I'm basing it because this is what I value based on its structure, and I form an identity with the community that's associated with that, and it gives us an orientation. And again, it's not the totality, because we all have different of these things, but this is the context here. And so again, this Jupiter, Mercury, Venus, Uranus, all of this stuff is initiating the construct that Pluto and Saturn and the South Node in Capricorn are holding into us. Okay, so how are you being reshaped? How are you being defined? How are you being put into a box that says this is it? And it's not something as literal as you're actually being put into a box, but you are definitely being shaped. And you need to be shaped, because if you weren't being shaped, then there would be nothing there, and there would be no boundaries. And this is, again, a healthy thing to understand. It's all about the differentiation of boundary. Where are you standing within this process? And this is all coming up for review in that sense. Okay, so I'm going to end there in terms of describing that. Just drink some water. Okay. All right, so I'm going to check the Patreon, and for anybody that's interested, Raising Vibrations is a Patreon page, and what we do is we just have these new and full moon live streams, and on my Patreon page, I just get patrons to post a bunch of questions they want me to answer for them, and then I share it with you guys. So if you're interested in seeing what we do on Patreon, there is a link in the description. You can come check that out. And we've got loads of other things that are running at the background. And it's kind of what really just sustains us in the sense of being able to do this. Okay. All right. So I'm just finding the actual page itself. Okay. Okay, so I'm not actually going to speak to anybody's name specifically, but so one of the patrons says, will you speak on finding our inner home moon with our deepest desires, Scorpio, and how our culture and conditioning has steered us away from feeling good and deserving of our preferences in each moment, which leads to the feeling a foundational sense of guilt and the idea that no matter where we are, we should be doing things differently. Wow, that's an interesting point, to be honest, or suggestion at least. I definitely agree with you. I think that's the question of how our cultural conditioning, and this is what I was speaking to a lot earlier in the thread, which was, there is such diversity within our world, and of course, we have structured a reality in which diversity can flourish in some ways, and in other ways it's very oppressive. And in a sense, we are, in some way, shape, or form, we're all oppressed, depending on how we, what the types of levels of that oppression is going to be. And so what I came to wrestle with when I was going through a phase in, I think, 2013, 2014, and maybe even 2015, when Saturn was in Scorpio, was the experience of deep psychological disempowerment that was rooted in the absent and okay, the absent father archetype. Okay, and so when I talk about the absent father archetype, I speak to it in a sense that goes a little bit deeper, and we talk about the absent father archetype as the social conditioning that shaped the gender of masculinity and femininity into specific roles, and then how those roles naturally repressed the naturalness of our psychological nature, which was that not all women want to, be at home and, raise children, as an example. And that not all men wanted to go into the world and be assertive and those types of things. And so we didn't know about that consciously. Subconsciously, we knew about that. And so that kind of created a whole entire structure of interfacing with a framework of cultural definitions that was the ideology of the time. And so that led to, if you were stepping outside the boundaries of what represented definition, then you were misbehaving, or that you were going down the wrong path, or that you were out of alignment, or that there was something wrong with you. And so we conjured up a whole lot of bunch of labels that would then, in a sense, repress undesirable behavior patterns. One, because it was outside the context of what could be controlled, and two, it then also labeled something that we didn't understand, and naturally so. That was, our progression, and we didn't know how to deal with those things, which is why a lot of the Uranus through Aries squaring Pluto and Capricorn kind of flooded through things like, gay rights becoming something that was actually real, and you could get married if you were gay, as an that this was something that was like, wow, in 2014 and 15 this was now available. And it was like, okay, is this where we are as a race? But that's the point. A lot of restriction. And so all of these structures kind of were in place in that sense. And so naturally speaking, from these oppressive structures that were at the top, that then labeled down into social interpersonal relations, and then eventually into myths and truths that would be called the Adam and Eve experience, which, by the way, will be available at some point, because I can't wait to get into that whole entire experience of how Adam and Eve are essentially the repressed versions of Lilith and Lucifer, and that being freedom in the sense of being able to exist in a world and where you weren't following a specific set of instructions, and if you didn't follow those instructions, then you were condemned to a behavior that was undesirable, and so therefore you should feel guilty. And so there again, this energy brings up that, and that's that Venus conjunct Uranus again, where it's like substructures of crystallized behaviors and value structures that are rooted in these myths are coming up to the surface, and we're like, oh, that feels outdated and archaic. And is this part of the old paradigm? Yes, it is. Okay, well, chuck that out, because we don't need that anymore, because we're not that anymore. And so this is where we are right now. And that's the point of this whole thing when I said it was a new direction. It was like, now we throw out that whole entire structure of old paradigm thinking that was clearly supportive at the time, but repressive now. And now we're in a place where it's a little bit different. We're saying, okay, so how do we explore this new thing? So the idea of Capricorn and the structure of our lives, we need these boundaries in place, but because these boundaries are kind of the structures are being pushed quite a lot in the sense of, shaken, and ideologies and myths and substructures within our psyche are being unwinded, as it were, so that we could begin to see what they were and realize that it's no longer part of the future. Things like guilt and things like failure and things like shame and things like low self-esteem and value in yourself, all of these types of stuffs will come to the surface, and we just have to kind of heal through them. And there's an amazing bunch of people on the internet that have specifically dedicated their lives now to helping us unravel these complex emotions that have been buried subconsciously within our psyche or repressed because of the fear of failure, or the fear of vulnerability, or the fear of judgment, or the fear of everything else. So that's something that I think is highly transformational under this full moon, and another one to actually say that it's part of the whole entire abortion dilemma that has just arisen within the collective psyche of America at the moment. So I think we're busy reshaping the context of what is doing things differently, and why do we judge each other so much, and why are we always pointing out? I remember Jeffrey Wolf Green, when he was talking about Pluto transit the 10th house, and he had said that, one thing that you'll become aware of with this transit is how you judge other people. And then I was like, wow, and this was in 2013. And I was like, hold on, Pluto's transiting through Capricorn. And so naturally speaking, lo and behold, that's what I see all the time. Everybody just policing everybody else because it's become so chaotic, and, chaos in itself is very difficult to deal with. And so, Capricorn provides some structure, and judgments hold us in place. And I think we're trying to reconstruct the idea of what is healthy boundaries and what is not, and where do we fit into this thing. And that's another sort of North Node in Cancer, Mars in Cancer thing is what is the structure of the identity and the boundaries that we have. And this is the new direction I'm talking about. We don't know it. And so we have to kind of just, or almost in a sense, naturally just allow the transits to, and maybe this might be a little bit fatalistic or nihilistic in the approach, but let the symphony of the program, the astrology, kind of guide us into natural insights that arise, and so we can reorganize and restructure ourselves in accordance with values that are rooted in what we feel is healthy. So one of the examples that I can put across very, very clearly is there is a book called No Bad Kids. And that is a literal example of how transformation took place in my own personal life, because that book or audio, you can find it on the internet. Just type in "No Bad Kids" for any parents that have got toddlers, or any parent for that matter, to be honest, or any person, actually just any person. It just reconstructs the way that we understand discipline, and how we've been disciplined in the past, and where the fabric of shame and guilt and pointing fingers and not being able to take responsibility, and what is intimacy, and how we actually have created a world in which it's a lot easier to say things outside and blame an abstract concept versus understand our own emotional connection to it. And that's another way to see how that question that you speak about, how does the inner home moon, our self-identity, interact with the deepest desires of Scorpio? And it's a transformation. It's a commitment to realizing that the substructure of our psychological fabric of reality and the construct of our whole entire social reality is rooted in this decaying stuff that's very outdated and likes to blame other people. And of course, for a long period of time, that's how it's been set up. And so that's coming to an end. And thank you very much, Pluto and Scorpios, for also on some level actually wanting to really confront that on a very deep level and want that transparency. So I hope that kind of responds to that question in a way that's supportive. Okay. Okay. So another patron writes, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the full moon making a conjunction with an outer planet in their natal chart, right? This full moon in Scorpio is conjunct my natal Uranus in the 6th, opposing transiting Sun and Mercury in my 12th house. Thanks. Okay. So we've already addressed the idea of outer planet and inner planet hitting each other. When it becomes something personal, as in where it's happening in your own personal charts, when you're looking at the 6th and 12th house, you're looking at the context of, firstly, Virgo and Pisces are transitionary archetypes. And so they're transitioning from subjective consciousness, which is Aries to Leo, and then from objective consciousness or objective awareness that goes from Libra all the way to Aquarius. So Virgo initiates a necessity to realize that other people exist, and so it's a transition from subjective self-awareness to objective self-awareness, right? Leo, everything's about me, and that's a positive sense, to Libra, which is, oh, that person also has that, so how do I interact with that? And so Virgo does two things. It creates a necessary need to internally analyze your own imperfections so that you can enter the world in a kind of balanced and humble state. And two, it prepares you to realize that being of service to other people on some level is a way to learn interpersonal skills. Okay. And so we can get to understand other people's needs, so that when we're kind of negotiating and establishing a needs-based way of behaving, then we're able to actually go, oh, okay, I recognize that you have needs as well, and I have needs. And so how do we find a kind of interbalance between the two? And this is the whole point of Libra, which is why if you're a Pluto and Libra soul, or have Pluto in the 7th house, or have the North Node in the 7th house, or have a shitload of planets in the 7th house, you're going to be learning this polarity between listening the other person's reality and so on and so forth, which can be a very difficult thing to do all the time. So the fact that this is happening in your 6th house, you'll probably come into contact with, from your soul's perspective, a necessity or a need to heal the values that you hold within your own personal soul trajectory. So in this sense, you take what I've shared with you on this full moon, and you superimpose it on your natal chart. And so this is something that your values are shifting into, right? What do you consider to be essential in your life around your routines? What do you consider service to be? How would you like to be of service? How are you healing your own subconscious inner critic? Yeah, that Virgo, that critic person is hyper strong with Venus in Virgo, or Mars in Virgo, or any planet in the 6th house in Virgo. So you're dealing with that personal relationship between how spirit and matter is coming to life. What is, how do you take something and see the beauty in it, and then offer it to somebody else and say, how do you see the beauty in that? And how does that get that person to be in contact with a deeper aspect of themselves? Because the Pisces archetype in this context is a union with the divine in that way. So how does your relationship with the divine work, and how do you channel the divine into your physical reality? Being another thing that's important. Yes, correct. An issue with Libra archetype is that it often doesn't want to hear uncomfortable truths. Correct, because it's it doesn't want to have that destabilizing experience. It's wants everything to be very harmonic and diplomatic. And for somebody that has Pluto at 29 degrees and Venus, and Mercury at 29 degrees Libra, plus before I was born there was a new moon, a full moon that was taking place. I had a new moon take place in Libra before I was born, and that's something that I also found really, really fascinating. Just kind of segue into it quickly. Is that you should really check out what the new and full moons were taking place before you were born, because they actually provide quite a lot of context to the substructure of your karma coming into this life. And Dane Radar actually points to that quite a lot. So somebody that's got a lot of kind of Libra energy, it can be very, very difficult sometimes to look at that core context of that truth, and holding it as your own, or not wanting to have it as your own, because it destabilizes. Okay, so I really hope that kind of responds to your question there in that sense. Okay, so another patron says synergy plus sustainability plus vision plus service potential plus release. Yeah, absolutely, definitely one of those energies, part of this full moon. Have you sensed it this way? What are your thoughts on these insights? Absolutely. Sustainability being a core component, but not sustainability in the sense of how do you sustain something that's tyrannical, or how do you sustain something that's a structure that supports oppressive, or how do you sustain a legislation that passes something that obviously on some level has got a very strong nerve trigger samskara associated with it, right? So sustainability is something that I think we've got to, and this is what I wanted to say actually in the beginning, but sustainability, not in the sense of sustaining something that is essentially detrimental, and what detrimental is something that probably is defined based on the actual experience itself and maybe subjective, but sustainability in a completely different context. It's more about if something was existing and in its existence it was providing growth and something that was actually allowing for people to eat from, as an example, like fruit in that sense, and you're planting a lot of fruit trees, and apples were kind of maintaining from that. How does sustainability allow for us to continue going forward? So if it's something that's moving us in a direction that helps us grow, then sustainability in that way. And so it becomes down to a question of what do we consider sustainable within a framework of structure in society, and what do we think is not sustainable, and so therefore we won't keep sustaining it. This is another question that manifests itself: is what do we consider sustainable and what do we don't, and why do we value that? And so that's the big thing here. All right, so a lot of us will come to that conclusion: I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to put my energy there and sustain that because it's no longer feeding me back, as an example. Scorpio archetype. So on an individual level, once Venus entered Taurus a few days ago and conjunct Uranus, okay, and it touched your Jupiter, Sun, Mercury, I started communicating my vision to people. Amazing. And you felt, you could listen. All right, so just going to say Mars touches your North Node. Okay, that's right. Chiron in Pisces, Neptune in Scorpio. We are ready to transform, and that's true for a lot of Pluto and Virgos that are on the planet right now. This is your time, and I can't wait to at some point release the video on the research I was doing, talking about how the Pluto and Virgos, this is your time, and that Neptune in Scorpio in your chart has been this kind of elusive thing, just going, oh, I'm not ready yet to tell you what it's about, but you're going to definitely feel me throughout your whole entire life. But now it's time, and so this full moon has really, this new moon firstly activated a lot of that in Taurus, and now the full moon in Scorpio is just kind of bringing the awareness fully into reality. Because again, for all of the Pluto and Virgos, at one point the Sun trined your Pluto this month, and Mercury trined your Pluto at some point. Venus is going to trine your Pluto, or if it already has, depending on how early you are in the generation. And Uranus at some point is going to trine your natal Pluto. So, this is the time of reckoning for you, and you are literally living in the midst of a collapsed society. Polarity point of Virgo is Pisces. Okay, so collapsing society, and then into chaos, because that's what it's going to lead to. We're leading into chaos. And so as everything destabilizes and the structures of our reality reshape itself in accordance with the new framework of values and traditions and beliefs and stuff like that, you are a part of that, and you are the architectures that will on some level actually be very influential in how this restructuring is going to take place. So something to think about there. Okay. So I believe Venus and Uranus, helped by releasing old patterns, are also pointed out to where and how I feel in order to know movement or moment by moment, and how I will create or co-create a society aware of its flaws, and that I've created a tremendous gap in its values. Brilliant. And I know your personal story as well. You've actually been doing that, where you've been highlighting where the superficialness of things have been existing, and how that just sustains a separation from a deeper connection. And so your values have shifted radically in the realization of that. And so that's a big part of it. Okay. All right. Okay. So I'm going to press the refresh button here just to see if there's... Super cool. So we've been live for about an hour and 15 minutes, which is usually the time that it takes. So there isn't anybody that's on the Patreon that's got more questions, and I'm happy to, for any of you that are on Patreon, and you just joined the live stream, please go over there to write your questions, and I'd be happy to respond to them over there. And in the meantime, if there's anybody that's on the YouTube chat, if you want to ask her a question, I'd be happy to answer it over there, but keep it specific to the full moon. And also, in a sense, I won't be able to kind of like understand your natal chart. So asking questions specific to your natal chart is something that might be difficult for me to answer in depth. So obviously, I'm only going to be limited to what I can archetypally express. But if you've got a question that you want to pose on the internet, on YouTube comments, feel free to do that. I'll happily respond to that. Okay. All right. So let me just check the chat here at the moment. Okay. Cameron, do you feel the abortion thing is tied to the Me Too movement with the full moon being in Scorpio? Yes, 100%, because it's not a coincidence that when all of that happened, Jupiter was going through Scorpio. And again, it was bringing up a lot of this, as you know, like really, really deep soul memory of it's just so complex. It really, really is. But at the same time, it's just very visceral and very real. And it shows us, it's like, if there is anything that has really, really shown human nature, it would be this full moon in Scorpio, sorry. And because it's brought such intense emotions to the surface around things that are at the root of the human experience, so yeah. Okay. Okay. This full moon was conjunct to the north, was conjunct Neptune south node. Okay. This full moon was conjunct to the Neptune south node conjunction for some of the 60s babies. Your thoughts? Right, exactly. So Neptune in Scorpio for the 60s babies, exactly. And exactly that it will be conjunct that and activating that Neptune. Now, here's the thing, and it's pretty cool. I have this little piece of paper in front of me over here with sort of the mapping of this talk that I want to do, and I want to try and weave into a video the critical points of what is occurring for us right now and how we can see what it's linked to. Like, I'm looking for the themes across time, and what I've noticed across from 1965 roughly up until now is one of the things that was really prevalent was that when I was born in 1983, Saturn had already passed Pluto. So Pluto was 29 degrees Libra, Saturn's at 6 degrees Scorpio. And so the last time that Saturn and Pluto actually made a conjunction together was in 1982, 1983, in that period of time, right? And that was in Libra. And I found it really interesting that the next time that Pluto and Saturn conjunct each other is in the sign of Capricorn. And both Libra and Capricorn are firstly cardinal signs. So we're dealing with the nature of structural change. They are social energies as well, in the context that one is in the actual social structure, Capricorn, and Libra speaks to everybody's social expectations and how they interface with the structure, relationship expectations and interpersonal expectations and boundaries and so on and so forth. So when you're looking at something like the fact that Pluto and Saturn conjuncted each other in 1982, 1983 in Libra, and then you're dealing with something in 2019, and you correlate it back to the original imprint of Uranus conjunct Pluto and Virgo in 1965, it's like the seeds for the breakdown were impregnated into the collective psyche at that time. And at the time, it was necessary to have Neptune in Scorpio, because in order for the entire structure of society to collapse in on itself, in order for something new to be reborn out of it, you needed to have an archetype at the time of the collapsing, 2019, with people that had Neptune, meaning in complete destruction, annihilation, and death. And so naturally speaking, the Pluto and Virgos are kind of viscerally living this reality. We're all living it at the moment, but you guys have that meaning to that connection between the meaning of this. It's like you're very connected to the realization of why it's happening, because deeply buried within your DNA structure, the fabric of your reality, or your purpose as a generation, was to initiate the wave of the collapse. And so, you're dealing with that Neptune and Scorpio manifestation. And one of the ways that that manifests itself was the fact that within the structure there was a profound, not necessarily, because this is my sort of personal subjective ego conditioning around the archetype, because again, the archetype itself doesn't have any personification, it just is. So I'm personifying it this way, but it seems to be very relevant because of the emotional connection at a global level, which is that the social structure that we had established in the West, at least, and what it's done, has provided us with something, but now it's reached a point where it's run its course. And so it's the seeds of its own destruction are now becoming real. Okay. And so things like repressive gender roles are, being burst out of, as an example. And so that Neptune in Scorpio is the witnessing of the collapse of the social structures and the regeneration in that sense. So the abandonment and the destruction, the dark night of the soul as a collective level, and then the reemergence of something that is coming out of a new spiritual, new reality, a new spiritual form. And of course, most of your children are Pluto and Scorpios anyway, and so therefore their Plutos will land on your Neptunes. And so a lot of the Pluto and Scorpios are coming into the world, and they're like, Jesus, looking at this place and going, is this what we inherited? And so their whole entire trigger dynamic is the fact that there's it's just so much to go into. But that's what I see with this full moon. It's the initiation of what is going to begin to form the new structure, or not the new structure, but replace old, outdated perceptions and modes of reality, and what will need to be regenerated. And so you have an acute sensitivity to that. Okay. Yeah, exactly. The Me Too movement was originally started in 2006. Jupiter was in Scorpio then. And so this is the Me Too movement that was resurrected or rebirth out of the original birth. Love it. And, it's just nuts how... Okay. There was another question that I'd seen. Let me just go back to this. Hi, Simon. Do you work with Chiron? Yes, I do indeed. And if you go and have a look on YouTube, there is a 2-hour presentation I did on Chiron. I also have a 4-hour video series that I'd created that is the tools to work with Chiron independently in your chart. And actually, at some point, Shrewd, if we chat, maybe we can, potentially set up a whole entire workshop that we can do on Chiron. But in Chiron, within the context of this chart over here, it just simply talks about the healing necessity. And this is where I get the new direction, by the way. Chiron's in Aries, and the whole entire, like I said, the substructure of reality is reshaping itself, and how we're kind of reshaping ourselves within this context. Chiron's pointing to a healing journey of this new direction, and we don't know what that is. And so we're discovering at this point in time. And a lot of it has to do with the infrastructure of technology. All right. Okay, so I see somebody that went to Patreon, so I'm going to do that. And so if I haven't answered your question on the YouTube chat, guys, don't take it personally. I'm just kind of skimming through there. I'll attempt to do it in that sense. Okay. Let's have a look. Okay. All right. So hi. So a baby girl was born to the extended family yesterday, as at just after midnight. Any insights for the parents? I think she's on a mission. Okay. The way that I would answer this question is that when we're talking about an individual process, an individual birth, there is a specific reason as to why a soul chose to be born at this moment. And I could argue the point that every single one of us, and this is what I was speaking to really earlier about the nature of self-actualization, every single one of us has a mission. in that sense. And actually, to be honest, at some point, these are the three things that are really on my mind at the moment. That thing about the Pluto, looking at the fabric of 1965 and the connection to how the Pluto and Virgos are coming online, and these dates looking at 1983, and the context of segregation and separation and division within class cultures, and all of that type of stuff is deeply, deeply tied into that question you were talking about with the full moon landing on the south, or on Neptune in Scorpio, and the Me Too movement. It's all linked with humanity's separation and division of itself, and class differentiation, and putting things aside and saying you're this and you're this and you're that and you're that and you're that. And I think it's almost like to a point where diversity has reached a level of such separation that there's so much darkness sitting between the two that it's going to, there's a lot of work that needs to be done to bring us together, and that's maybe even a catastrophe that needs to happen. So that's that. And mission, everybody having a purpose or a destiny to fulfill. And I think that, so yes, I think there is a mission for all of us, and this person's mission, this child's mission, firstly would have chosen specifically to be incarnated into a family structure in which the evolutionary dynamics that are needed to shape the psyche of that person, of that soul's journey. So as a child, they'll be born into a specific structure. That structure will condition their relationship to life, and then eventually they hit their Saturn return, and then they'll go through a need to break out of that mold and then individuate into their purpose. So within the context of this chart, this person will have, with Venus conjunct Uranus, a highly sensitive electrical system to their body. Particularly, I think they will be highly self-reliant. I probably would see the symbolism also with a lot of stuff in Taurus as learning to understand the context of resources. So she may, or he may, be born into the experience where there's a lot of wealth or there's a lack of wealth, and so either way, one of those contexts is going to be shaped or shaping their reality. They're obviously coming in here to learn about what is healthy distribution of resources and what is survivability. Mars in Cancer would speak to, with again the Mars conjunct the North Node in Cancer, again it would speak to, this is a recreation or redefinition of a self-image. So you see a lot of this full moon, energy that I spoke about through this live stream will be specific to the baby girl that you speak about. And so their mission in that sense is really to, because I don't know what houses they're in, so I can't specifically know if this is in the 5th house or if it's creative potential. But what I can say with this type of symbolism is that they're clearly going to have a view on life, Jupiter retrograde, that wants to challenge pre-existing ideas. So there's a very good chance that they might be not wanting to, accept the beliefs or ideologies or the values of the environment around them, or they may accept them and then come to a point where they realize that those belief systems don't work for them anymore. And so with this type of symbolism, I think there is a strong emphasis on nurture, right, with Mars in Cancer, and with all the energy in Taurus, with Mercury conjunct the Sun as well, probably needs to have a very stimulated mind. And yet with all of the energy in Taurus, it could indicate that the mind is very practical and slow and needs time to digest things. I think this type of kid would require time to digest things with a lot of earth in it. Okay. So that's what I feel comfortable speaking about, because I don't actually have the actual chart itself, but if you feel that you want to write to me privately on Patreon with the chart, I'd be happy to respond to you. Okay. Yes, Richard Johnson, I highly recommend Gava Matea's work on trauma and how it affects our neurology and human development from birth. 100%, love his work. Absolutely true. It's amazing. Okay, let's have a look. Yes, this. Okay, sorry, just to kind of get onto this over here. So I know that we've been doing this for an hour and a half. Rich John Tune saying, thanks, Simon. I have Neptune in Scorpio and my world collapsed almost 7 years, right? Completely, because of obviously Saturn transiting your Neptune and leading me to quit everything, complete collapse. It's like a complete abandonment. And then to travel the world and search for answers, and my deep Scorpio diving into meaning. And so here's the thing, okay? So what I noticed was that a lot of the Pluto and Virgos were born under conditioning in which there was a lot of religious structure within the home. Okay. And whether it was religious structure in the sense that it was mom and dad saying we're going to church, or it was mom and dad were schooled in a specific type of ideology, or that grandma believed in it and they were highly influential. Either way, there was a lot of religious kind of structural conditioning around the meaning of faith and purpose, and that life was structured in this context. And so it wasn't a coincidence that you have something like the Pluto and Scorpio, the Pluto and Virgos, struggling deeply within themselves, like wrestling deeply within themselves, the idea of faith and the idea of God and the idea of purpose through the lens of religious structure. And I think that on one level, there is a very profound thing to understand about your generation, because what was preceding your birth, a lot of the world needed that in some sense in order for there to be a sense of meaning to the phenomena of reality. Because let's be honest, right? Taurus, right? I spoke about this earlier in previous in Uranus and Taurus live stream I did. There's two of them on our website, on our YouTube channels. The first one, where it's got a picture of the white background, and I talk about the relationship between Taurus and Neptune or Pisces. And actually, in the new moon, I do the same, where I go into deep detail with it. You know, Taurus as an archetype is very, very much the boundary that we establish as human beings between the realization of our own mortality, Scorpio, and what we need to do in order to survive in the world in which everything in its sense is right next to you, saying, you know, life is not friendly in that way. And I think that this is a very confrontational Scorpio thing. Life is not made up of the glamorous Hollywood projections that have been filtered into our psyche, that we try and achieve these states of living that are rooted in idealizations and ideals that are so, you know, life at its most core level is very, very, very confrontational. And that relationship between the physicalness of what it means to be human, psychologically and emotionally and neurologically, and the context of the void that's there, that's always just touching you subtly like that all the time. You're waking up every single day. Imagine just for a moment, and now there are obviously going to be some exceptions to the rule here, but for those of you that are not in the context, imagine you just stopped going to work, right? You just stopped doing the thing that provided you with financial security, and you just stopped doing it. Okay? At some point, you will begin to feel that edge, because it will start to creep up on you, where you'll start to see all the resources, you've used up the food in your house. And then like, oh my God, what do I do now? Well, I can't go to the supermarket anymore because I don't have, like, I've used my resources in the bank. And now that that's gone, what are my options? And then we start to regress into a very primitive state of, okay, so do I go and do I grow, blah, blah, blah. So this Uranus and Taurus energy is also going to push the envelope on that very strongly. And I think that up until this point, we as a human race have lived in a reality in which the structures of our society have not given us the privilege that we have today, at least. And I think that this is another Uranus and Taurus thing, is really confronting corporations and getting them to realize and take the responsibility for the idea of climate change. because there's a lot of kind of emphasis on people taking responsibility, which on some level is a deep rooted, oh, you've messed up, humanity, you're horrible and you're pathetic and you're, and yet all of the corporations are responsible for this intense kind of pollution of things, and we're kind of focusing on the wrong thing. We're focusing on oh, I'll just buy I'll take a bag with me, and my bag that's made out of a organic whatever, I'll take it to the store and I'll just use that instead of buying a plastic bag. And it's like, yeah, that's true on one level and it makes a small dent, but what we really need to be doing is getting accountability for corporations that exist, that are providing us with things that we like, that have their structures and their values in things that are destructive to the earth, and also holding them accountable for it. And even to a certain degree, maybe even like holding awareness to say, I won't support that, or I'm not supporting that because of the values that are held within it. But I'm also looking at what I feel is comfortable and going, wow, I support that, even though it's detrimental, because I like the comfort of it. Taurus, the frog in the well syndrome, and the Scorpio energy just hits it and says, okay, everything's structured in a way that's like the frog in the well. Like, you're comfortable in this place, but you're only comfortable because it doesn't threaten that edge of reality just coming closer. And so I think the Pluto and Virgo has come into this reality in which the conditioning helped us. And so as the framework of that conditioning collapses in on itself, you're like, what is the meaning? And so that Neptune and Scorpio also points the edge to that. It's not just about a collapsing society and its frameworking and seeing that, but it's also the question of how do we rebuild a societal structure that has spiritual truths embedded in it. And what does that mean as a reconstruction or a rehabilitation? I like to use that word with Neptune, rehabilitation. And so this is maybe even speaking to the question on Patreon around the baby girl that was born. She would be carrying this imprint of what structures do we hold in place that are representing a rehabilitation of values that are supporting human sustainability, and seeing things like solar cells as capturing solar energy and then transmuting that into electricity so that we can use that and maintain our protection from nature in that sense. So that's another thing there, talking about diving deep into the meaning. It's the confronting things like atheism as an example, or nihilism, or realizing that when we pull away the veil and we see it for what it is, we don't like it and we don't know how to deal with that. And so therefore it's a lot easier to just bunker up and stay safe and support things that keep us in comfortability, but comfortably numb. And that's what I think I'm going to end out on today, guys. Okay. I think I definitely think that that's where I'm going to end today. It was amazing to sit here and have this space. I am grateful for all of your attention. I'm grateful for all of the Patreon people that support Raising Vibrations. I appreciate you guys a lot, and all of you over there, and Jen as well. Thank you very much for allowing us to hold the space to actually have this. She put the whole entire Patreon thing together, and she put this whole live stream up as well. I just came down and sat and was given the opportunity to share my own views. So that was that's always something that's just amazing. So we appreciate that. Okay. All right, peeps. Thanks very much. I'm gonna end the stream over here, and I'll just chat to you in the chat box afterwards. So yeah, have a wonderful day, and we'll be back with another video very soon. Okay.